Stirring Up Trouble, Nelson, Cow's Best Friend, An Autobiography, Adaptations and Excerpts. Stirring Up Trouble, adapted from A Desire to Serve the People by Mary Benson. Born to Chief Henry Gadla Mandela and his wife Nonkofi on July 18, 1918, Nelson was given the Xhosa name Ralilila and a European name, Nelson, due to the fashion of having a heroic name. Nelson, along with his three sisters, lived in a family kraal near Umtata in the Transkei. He was tall, fast runner, hunted buck, and stole Mayalai cobs from maize fields. He loved the countryside and was fascinated by the tales told by the tribe's elders, which inspired him to serve his people in their struggle for freedom. This desire eventually led to him becoming the most famous political prisoner of our time, with songs written about him and streets named after him. When Nelson first went to school, he was shocked to find history books describing his people as savages and cattle thieves. Despite this, he was eager for Western education and proud that his great-grandfather had given land for a mission school. He pretended not to mind being teased about his clothes, cast-offs from his father, even when fellow pupils teased him about his clothes. Nelson, Cow's Best Friend, adapted from Nelson Mandela by Benjamin Pogrund. Nelson Mandela was born in the Transkei region of South Africa in the village of Kunu, a collection of beehive-shaped huts with thatch roofs. His mother had 3 huts, and Nelson lived with her and 3 immediate sisters. Nelson's mother had her own field and kraal, an enclosure for cattle made from thorn bushes. As Nelson was old enough to walk properly, he took on the job of looking after the family's cattle and goats. Despite his mother's inability to read or write, Nelson started attending a local school. He was noted for his quiet and industrious nature, but the school only had classes for the early years. When Nelson's father died, there was no money for further education, so his nephew, Chief John Jantaba, took over. In Xhosa society, all members of the Madiba clan were treated as people in the same family, and Mandela and others could go to the home of any fellow Madiba member in the Sake village or miles away. In 1928, Nelson moved to the Great Place and shared a rendezvous with his cousin, Justice. He learned English, geography, and history in one room at the school, writing on slates. After school, Mandela and Justice went to the fields to look after the cattle and drive them back to the kraal for milking. An autobiography excerpt from Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. My mother presided over 3 rendezvous at Kunu which, as I remember, were always filled with the babies and children of my relations. In fact, I hardly recall any occasion as a child when I was alone. In African culture, the sons and daughters of one's aunts or uncles are considered brothers and sisters, not cousins. We do not make the same distinctions among relations practiced by Europeans. We have no half-brothers or half-sisters. My mother's sister is my mother, my uncle's son is my brother. Of my mother's 3 huts, one was used for cooking, one for sleeping and one for storage. In the hut where we slept, there was no furniture. We slept on mats and sat on the ground. I did not discover pillows until I went away to school. The stove on which my mother cooked was a 3-legged iron pot that rested on a grate over a hole in the ground. Everything we ate grew and made ourselves. My mother planted and harvested her own mealies. After harvesting the mealies, the women ground the kernels between 2 stones. The portion of this was made into bread, while the rest was dried and stored in pots. Unlike mealies, which were sometimes in short supply, milk from our cows and goats was always plentiful. From an early age, I spent most of my free time in the veld playing and fighting with the other boys in the village. A boy who remained at home tied to his mother's apron strings was regarded as a sissy. At night, I shared my food and blanket with these same boys. I was no more than 5 when I became a herd boy, looking after sheep and calves in the fields. I discovered the almost mystical attachment that the Xhosa have for cattle, not only as a source of food and wealth, but as a blessing from God and a source of happiness. It was in the fields that I learned how to knock birds out of the sky with a slingshot, to gather wild honey and fruits and edible roots, to drink warm, sweet milk straight from the udder of a cow, to swim in the clear, cold streams, and to catch fish with twine and sharpened bits of wire. I learned to stick fight essential knowledge to any rural African boy and became adept at its various techniques, parrying blows, feinting in one direction, striking in another, breaking away from an opponent with quick footwork. From these days I date my love of the veldt, of open spaces, the simple beauties of nature, the clean lines of the horizon.